Now, New Democrat Paul Dewar was the MP who requested this report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And Paul Dewar joins us now here in Ottawa. And so, Paul Dewar, your reaction, you asked for the report. Did you get what you wanted?
Well, the answer is more or less. We got the best we could get from what the government was willing to provide. Mr. Page was very clear that he didn't get the cooperation he was looking for. And I say, as the foreign affairs critic for my party, one of the areas he didn't get cooperation was from foreign affairs, which is deeply worrying for us as a party, but should be deeply worrying for all Canadians.
I asked Mr. Emerson about that. Did you hear the reply?
I did, but I'm a little confused as to the response from Mr. Page and I guess from Mr. Emerson. Maybe it didn't get up to Mr. Emerson. I don't know. I can't answer that. But what I do know is that what Mr. Page said, and I have confidence in his abilities, and he didn't get the cooperation he was looking for.
So what do you think the new cost... I mean, your party wants to be out of Afghanistan anyway. Does this give it more urgency, or how do you feel about that?
Well, let's clarify what our party's position is, and I said this in my statement today, is to put our allies on notice. It'd probably take about 6 months for a responsible withdrawal, and to put our focus on the peace building and negotiations that everyone else is looking at right now. In fact, just today, the Americans are talking about having to build up capacity in terms of peace building. But yeah, look, we've said that the reason I asked for this study to be done was because the government wasn't forthcoming. I asked questions in the House, questions in committee, something called order paper questions that every MP can ask the government, and they kept not only saying that this was information they've already given, which they hadn't, they said that we don't account for it in this manner, in other words, just for the war in Afghanistan. What we have now is that the cost of the war will be at least $7 billion more than the government had accounted for. It's probably going to be more. This is probably just the tip of the iceberg. And I guess the question to the government, and quite frankly to Liberals, is have they costed that in their platforms? We're the only ones who have it in our platform, and the other two parties haven't. So where are they going to get the money from is the question.
Well, I guess the issue, too, though, is what do you count in and what do you not? As long as there's a record, I would put to you, Mr. Dewar, as long as there is a record of the money, all the money that is spent, whether it is accounted for in the way Mr. Page has, and that's
right.
What he said he did,
yep.
Or it's accounted in a different way, but as long as Canadians know the money is being spent, it probably is harder if you have to go through all those estimates and books. I take it. I take your point on that. But the fact is, it's not secret money. It's just not put in the columns that might be easier to see it in.
Well, it's a little more than that, and he was clear on this. It is the problem with the estimates, and that's why I support and we actually strengthen the role of the Budgetary Officer of Parliament when we were at committee on Bill C-2, the Accountability Act. But it means that you have to account for the money that you not only have spent, and that's one thing, but how much you're going to spend and how much you're going to need to spend, particularly when you look at making sure that our veterans are taken care of when they come home. We have an explosion of soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder that the Veteran Affairs can't account for and tell us how much is going to be needed. We need to know how much money is required for them. But the other thing is, what about...
But just to go to that point, Paul,
yes.
If they don't know how many people they have to deal with or for how long,
right.
It's very hard to put a cost on that, I would think.
Well, that's right.
It would just be an estimate, and it may be wrong.
Well, no, in fact, most institutions do this, Don. I mean, be it insurance companies or pension funds do that, and that's what Page is saying. And that's why I'm underlining the fact this is the tip of the iceberg. He wasn't able to fold all those numbers in. So when we say $7 billion, this is a very conservative estimate of how much this war is going to cost in addition to what the government said of $8 billion. It's going to be a lot more and at least $7 billion more. And that's something that should, it should not only be put on the table, but the question to the other parties is where are they going to find the money for this? They haven't costed all the military hardware.
So do you think this is an issue coming late in the election campaign that will either change the election or change Canadians' views of what's going on in Afghanistan and our participation in it?
Right. I think it's part of the debate, and at a time where we're facing stormy economic weather, it's part of what Canadians need to know from all parties is, you know, how are you going to pay for this, and what is the opportunity cost? In other words, you pay for this, what does it mean? Where are you going to take money away from? And that should affect everyone's vote, absolutely. And finally, I would say that this is something that should have come out hopefully before the election, but you know, Mr. Page was doing the best he could. I was hoping we would have this information prior to the election. In fact, it should have been information that was readily available when we were debating this in the House and the extension of the war.
Paul Dewar, thanks for your time now. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Don.
Now, we are standing by. We have invited Bob Rae, the Liberal Foreign Affairs critic. He has accepted, but he is not before a camera yet. But when he is, we'll bring him to you. Now, coming as it does less than a week before Canadians head to the polls, today's report was big news on the campaign trail. Here's what some of the party leaders had to say.
Those numbers show that the costs of the war are dramatically higher than the Harper government has been telling Canadians. The costs are billions of dollars more, and whether it was the Liberals who took us into the war, the Conservatives who extended the war with the help of the Liberals, they haven't been straight up with Canadians about the cost.